I am great, Chad, and I am so excited and thankful that you asked me to come on and talk about this movie. Yeah, there is some of that involved for sure. Yeah, sure. So I host a podcast as well called Feelin' Film, and that is a podcast where we try to focus a little bit more on the emotional takeaways that we have from watching movies versus critiquing the technical elements as much. And I host that with my best friend Patrick. It's a long running show about I don't know, year and a half, going on our second year now, and it's a pretty exciting thing. Really enjoying that. We have been having a lot of fun getting to know other podcasters and just going through a ton of good movies. We kind of bounce back and forth between newer films and also older films as well. So we have a wide breadth of episodes for listeners to check out, and yeah, it'd be great to have some of your listeners give us a ping too if they were interested. The last thing I said was it'd be if your listeners were interested, it'd be great if they gave us a listen to. Essentially, is what I said. You didn't actually pause, right? Because I'm still recording. Okay, good. Hi, hi, Tucker. You're so small and cute. Oh, I love it. Oh, it reminds me of Strider so much. Yeah, I get one of mine. Pika goes into crazy mode and starts chasing everybody around the house. Sometimes during podcasting, and it's a nightmare because they like knock chairs, boom, knocking chairs over. Got close. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I'm always up on new releases, you know that. And I'm glad you did Jumanji because then you got to start it with a positive movie right off the bat. The greatest showman. Well, it's a lengthy movie, that's for sure. I'm pretty impressed. Well, I'm glad you before I go there, I'm glad you pointed out during that section that this musical is based on, or I'm sorry, this movie, this film is based on the musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber and not directly based on the book by Victor Hugo because there are differences and I've read the book and the musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber is also based off of the book, right? Oh, what, I'm getting cats confused. Who is it? Who wrote? Ah, crap. Oh, that's the people that you were talking about. Okay, let me back up. Let me say that all again. I don't know. That's good because I don't know. I was gonna say something about cats, and so I got confused. That's a very good point. Okay, let me pause, give you a moment to for a spot. Well, I absolutely have a history with this film and this musical. And I'm really glad that you pointed out that this movie is based on the musical because that is a distinction from being based off of the book by Victor Hugo. Those are two different things. The musical itself, the stage play, was based off of the book, and they don't play out exactly the same way. I've read the book, and so that's an important thing to note if you're going to go into this. So for me, oh man, this this goes back to high school, and I was in marching band. This is my first time of discovering Les Mis. I was playing the trumpet, and we decided that we were going to do. Well, we didn't decide. Our band teacher decided that we were going to do a Les Mis halftime show. And I remember very distinctly One Day More specifically, and the rousing kind of anthem that is when you're marching around on the field. This led me to wanting to check out the entire soundtrack, which I did. And before I knew it, I was driving around in my 1988 Ford Tempo, thinking I was really cool, blaring the Les Mis soundtrack and alternating it with Christian rap. That's how I rolled. Uh, I fell so hard in love with this soundtrack. What I think shocked me was that it could be listened to straight through from the first track to the last track. It is a complete, it's the perfect soundtrack for me. There's no little hiccups where I feel like I need to stop and skip. It also tells the story so well that you could listen, and I think all good musicals or great musicals do this, where you can listen through the soundtrack and you don't even need to see the musical itself. Patrick talks about this all the time, my best friend, who I like to reference. He's listened to Dear Evan Hansen multiple times, but he's never seen the actual stage play. Yet he knows the story just fine by listening to the songs. And for me, Les Mis is like that. And the film does a lot of that because they're singing the lyrics, which is basically singing the dialogue. But for me, yeah, I just fell in love with it. That led me to reading the book after that, and then I saw the stage play late in my high school years, and I was hooked. After that, I've seen it a few more times. Even with the more and more times that I've gone to the theater, I have some season tickets to see Broadway here in Seattle every year, and I see at least 5 or 6 shows. Les Mis is still my favorite, and I'm getting to go see it again this summer. I'm super excited about that, and it's always just really affected me emotionally and held a special place in my heart. Yeah, it's my favorite too. Well, yeah, it absolutely does, and it does the same thing to me. And now watching it, and what triggered the podcast you were referring to earlier, I decided to watch this over the holidays and over Christmas, and I was mentioning it to you, and so we started talking about it. And I think this came out. I don't remember the right year, but it's about 5 years. It's maybe the fifth anniversary of when it came out over Christmas, and I still remember seeing it then. And like you, I have that same visceral, unconscious, or involuntary reaction to the film when I started up. I think my first tweet when I was trying to watch it this most recent time was, "Well, we've started the movie and we're about 2 minutes in to look down, and I'm marching around my apartment singing," and I mean that's how quickly it happens for me. And so I think there's kind of two things when it comes to movies. You can watch a movie and you can evaluate it. You can always be thinking about its quality and its acting and its technical aspects and how the cinematography is and things like that. And then there's just straight up no concerns about it. You are feeling the movie. And for me, I feel like that's what happens when I watch this is I have a moving experience every single time. And there's things that I'm critical of in the film for sure, but I don't even care. I just don't want to talk about them. I don't want to think about them. They are out of my mind as quickly as they come in, and I can't be objective about it because it, like you said, it's so powerful on your soul. It just gets in there, and I really hope you get a chance to see the stage play at some point. And it's different. I mean, this is the movie, right? So it's not quite the same, but it is equal. I mean, it's still the same story, and it's still got the same affecting pieces to it. So it works out well. Well, I'll apologize up front and say I've got a lot of notes. I don't know. Some of this stuff might kind of be blending story and characters together, and if I get off track, just reel me in and say, "Well, wait." But for me, I think the first thing that stands out is that on the surface, this is a movie or a story about the French Revolution. That's what you think, right? That's kind of what everybody thinks when they don't know Les Mis, when they haven't experienced it. They say, "Oh, that's about that French Revolution." But in reality, it's not so much about the French Revolution. It's about kindness and cruelty, and it's got these romantic plots all the way throughout that are not just romance in terms of love and male female marital type love. There's a romance of sorts between Valjean and Javert that is equally as captivating to me. And there's multiple versions of this that take place. And so I think those aspects of the film, the fact that it does, you mentioned it, that word, I think we're going to say it a whole lot of times throughout the show, is redemption. This movie is about redemption. It's about a lot of things, but redemption is kind of the biggest arc. If you take it from very beginning to the absolute very ending scene, it's about redemption. And the other thing that really stands out to me within that is that I feel like it's kind of special how all of the deaths in this film, we are talking spoilers, right? Okay. All of the deaths in this film, people seem to die with who they want or how they want. of their own volition, except for the antagonist, Javert. He does alone, which is really sad, by throwing himself into the River Seine, which is interesting because there's a line in a La La Land song Audition where they say, and tumbled into the Seine. And I wondered if that was a reference to Les Mis. And I actually tweeted Pasek and Paul, the lyricists for that song, and they said, I said, is this a reference to Les Mis, or were you guys just, is this just a massive coincidence? And they responded to me on Twitter and said, the world may never know. So I don't know. That's not, it's not, either way, they're not giving us the answer, but I love that they did comment back. Anywho, I digress. My point is, with the death scenes, Fantine dies with Valjean. So she dies with someone who is showing her compassion. Eponine dies with Marius the way that she wants to die, the person she wants to be with. Valjean dies with Cosette and Marius with him, his daughter. So I feel like that's a very neat, important thing that happens in this film as well. Oh, oh. Mm-hmm. And then there's an interesting piece that, like, if we're going to talk about scenes, right? Favorite scenes in this film. This is hard because there's so many moving pieces. I'm glad that we're not on Feel and Film right now, where we have to pick a connecting point. That's that one moment where we connect the most with the movie, because I don't know that I would be able to do that with this film. There's so many that I would feel it would be like picking children, a favorite, a favorite. So I don't enjoy this moment, but when the story changes to briefly to Gavroche's viewpoint, and this is the little boy in the Resistance who ends up dying. His little miniature arc in the story really kind of slays me because he ultimately is the one that first calls out Javert's presence as a spy, which leads to Valjean showing mercy to Javert and totally just screwing up his head forever at that point. But Gavroche then ends up, after the deaths of the rest of the Les Amis, which is the resistance, Javert arrives and he sees that Gavroche has died. And this is the little boy who is trying to collect ammo and stuff in front of the barricades and ends up getting shot. And it's just a terrible, terrible scene. Well, the fact that Javert comes and sees him, he's clearly disturbed by the casualties. I love this beat where he puts his medal on Gavroche. It's this little nod of recognizing the young boy's courage. And I feel like it's just the first time that we've really seen any kind of pity or sadness come out of Javert. So that's a story beat that I really kind of focus in on, and a lot of times it doesn't get as much attention, that character in that arc. He's not one of the main characters. Gavroche is not, but everybody in this story is important and teaches us a lesson, I guess, if you will. And so that's my example of that. Man, I love that you mentioned that because I would have if you hadn't. The fact that, and this won Oscars in costume and production design. I'm sorry, it was nominated for Oscars in costume and production design, and it won for makeup and hairstyling, all of which are completely earned, in my opinion, too. The fact that that barricade, it is a single location. We are not moving throughout the town following characters with tracking shots because you couldn't do that on a stage, right? You would only be able to have the one setting. And so much like that, that's what we have. We have them in the rooms of the house, in one place at one time for a single song or a couple of different songs, which are progressing the plot along. And so I too really like that aspect of it. And I love that. I mean, they become just so much more epic than they even can be on stage. Like, there's no way that the docs looked on stage like they can look in this film. And I know that I think there's a lot of it was filmed in Bath, England, but some of these shots of the aerial shots of the docks specifically, they just give this epicness to it. You see how big it is, and that ship, how gigantic that is, that thing that they're pulling. The with regards to the music and the singing and the choice to record live in particular, the only song that was not recorded live, I believe, is Look Down, and that's the opening track. And the reason was because there's so much ambient noise from the water that you wouldn't have actually gotten to hear the people singing the song as well. It would have really affected it. But what I think is that by choosing to have them sing live, it captures this spontaneity of characters, and it's really raw emotionally. Like, it is absolutely raw emotionally. You're going to have some drawbacks with that. Occasionally you're going to have people who can't go up and down in a range, or choose not to, whatever Russell Crowe is doing. I don't know. He stays in a very monotone, place the whole film, which is an interesting nugget, by the way, is that Russell Crowe is in a band. I had no idea. No earthly idea. So he has somewhat of a musical background even, but it just, gosh, I love that choice so much. And it was a make or break one. You know what I mean? Like, it could have sunk this movie completely if that didn't work. But I think that everyone on this set was so bought in to this idea that you can tell it turned out as this passion project from all of them. Yes. Yes. That's No, it doesn't. And I think the important aspect of it really for me is that it's consistent. Frankly, he is that monotone voice, but he doesn't fluctuate at various points where you're like, "Oh no, Russell, you should be high here and you went low. You should be low here and you went high." It's just that's how he plays the character. So I don't know that it's even an. I don't know that it's that he doesn't have range. I think it very well may just be that that was a choice to play the character very stoic. Oh, oh, I see what you did there. At the end of the day, no, I think the biggest aspect of this is in all the wonderful characters. So let's go for it. Yeah. Love that. Oh, it totally does. And it's interesting. Before I continue with the Valjean stuff, when you were talking about that just now, I realized how much it relates to our current day American prison system in a lot of ways. I mean, this is a system that has failed these men, and Russell Crowe tries to justify it away by saying, no, you only got 4 years for stealing the bread, or Javert, you only got 4 years for stealing the bread, but the rest is because you ran. And it's this idea of the punishment's not fitting the crime, but we're just incarcerating people and ruining their lives and creating these emotionally bankrupt people who have no hope that just fall into this cycle where they're going to do the same thing over and over again because that's all they know. And they now believe that that is who they are. And I feel like in a lot of ways that our system is like that in America today. And so it's crazy to me that here we are. I don't even know when the book was written. I think in the 1700s, maybe 17 or 1800s. That yeah. So now here we are, 200-300 years later, and it's kind of the same thing in a different part of the world. But with Valjean's arc, man, yeah, the bishop scene in particular, right off the bat, is just so powerful. And I think it's telling that he's caught stealing silver. I don't think I think that's meaningful. I think that's intentional. Hugo uses lots of Christian references throughout this book and this story. And it really sets Valjean up for his redemption. That moment, that is the turning point for him, where he's going to shed that identity that he now, attaches to his failures, and he's going to be somebody different. And he even goes as far. I think it's really amazing that this has an adoption story as part of it. That's wild to me. That he ends up taking on Cosette as his own child, going as he has to bargain for her, which is also hilarious in the moment that it happens. But he ends up pouring himself out with mercy and giving that back. what the bishop gave to him, and I love it. One of my favorite parts of Valjean's story is toward the end when he's singing Valjean's confession, and he is telling Marius the story of his life and who he is. And there's this moment in it where Marius is doing callbacks in the song, and he says, "You're Jean Valjean." And the look on his face when that happens, it's like I cry. I'm already crying multiple, I'm probably still crying from the last thing, but it starts up again. And it's like the first time for me that he's been able to claim that identity again in so long, because he shed it and I don't remember exactly how old he is at the end, but it had to be, at least a 20, 30, 40 even year period where he couldn't be himself. He had to live under this guise of someone else. He couldn't claim his own name. And that's a big deal, the power of a name. And so right then he is recognized and accepted by Marius and Cosette as who he is. And you can feel that weight lifting off of him in Hugh Jackman's performance right there. And it's wonderful. Yeah, and he's the one that we can want to be like throughout at that point. And it makes it so much more heartbreaking when things are not going his way, or when he's about to be caught and he has to make all of these decisions again. And I mean, I love the moment when he lets Javert go. Again, with the performances, I just think Russell Crowe may have issues singing, but he does not have issues exhibiting the emotion that is necessary in that moment, because the way that he shows us how it must feel to have been chasing this man the whole time and feeling like he gets you in the headspace of knowing in his character's mind he's dead. He's been captured. They're going to kill him. There is no question for him because he doesn't understand this mercy. He doesn't know what that is. He doesn't even know that exists. And so when it's offered to you, you're just blasted. You don't know how to respond to it. And he doesn't know how to respond to it. Kind of like Valjean, he's caught off guard by that with the bishop, and they respond differently. And yet I think part of it is that Javert he tries to fight it in many ways, but it's like he can't. And I think that that's ultimately what leads to his suicide, is the weight of his negative choices, he does not feel like he's worthy of redemption. Whereas Valjean accepts that and goes out and earns it, or pays it forward, however you want to look at it. But Javert feels to me like he can't accept that mercy that he was shown. It overpowers him. Reconcile. They can't reconcile that. And that's what's tragic, right? Because it's not a happy moment. Like you said, he's not a villain. So we don't cheer. We don't stand up and root and say, "Yes, Javert is done." It's like, "Oh no." Like it's heartbreaking because that's not what we want for him, and that's not what Valjean wanted for him either. We want to see him redeemed as well. And unfortunately, we don't. But I mean, not everybody gets a wonderful end in this movie. It's realistic. People die. Eponine. I'm in love with Eponine, both as a character and Samantha Barks in this performance. Man, she's always been a favorite, but I think that in this film, this version of her has elevated her to where she may be my favorite part of the whole darn story. I look forward to when she finally is going to show up on screen, and I think I probably cry the hardest at her arc. And maybe that's because I relate. I don't know, but it's just she's got this very tragic arc where she grows up raggedy and poverty stricken. Early on, she prevents her father from hurting Marius by stopping his burglary of Cassette. She lies about his whereabouts when her father tells her to look for him, and then slipping Cassette and her father a note telling them to leave so that they can get away. She also takes it upon herself to find out where Cassette and Valjean live, and she decides to withhold his letters when she's asked to deliver them to him, which is interesting because obviously she's got feelings for him, so she wants him for herself. And ultimately, the biggest aspect of this is when she sneaks onto the barricades as a boy. That's her big moment. That's kind of the thing. And she's in love with Marius so deeply and madly. And I don't know that it's fair. I mean, they've grown up friends, obviously. And it's almost kind of off because Marius falls in love with Cosette in like the blink of an eye. It's like one of those love at first sight type deals where here is this woman, who, and this is so realistic to me, even in today's day and age, like the woman that's right there in front of you, your best friend, who would sacrifice and would actionably do anything for you and give all of herself to you. And yet that's not what he wants. He's got this sparkle and twinkle in his eye about the thing out in the distance, and that being Cosette. But anyway, Eponine ultimately takes a bullet for him, right? And to me, sacrifice is the ultimate depiction of love. And I don't necessarily mean where we all have to die to prove that we've loved someone, but sacrifice is what love is to me. It's giving up something of yourself for another person's benefit. And Valjean exhibits this over and over throughout, as we've talked about as well. It's absolutely beautiful to me when Eponine does this, and it's very inspiring. And I think it's a really good character arc for her, because it shows that no matter what she's been through, that she is capable of love and redemption as well. And she sings On My Own, which is, to me, one of the great songs about unrequited love that has ever been written. It is that song that when it comes on, you can't help but start singing along and you're in tears. I don't think I've ever listened to it or tried to sing it and not had my eyes full of water. You just can't. It's this doesn't always happen, but the best music can do that. It can bring that out. And I said involuntary before, and that's what it is. It's you're not thinking about it. It just creates the emotion in your brain. Whatever it is, it's triggering something that does that. When she says I love him, but only on my own, I think I personally can relate to that in many ways at many times in my life where I've had that feeling, and I remember that in that moment when she sings that lyric and I lose it. And so I think that for a lot of people, Eponine is a very relatable character, not just for me. Oh, I may have to do that. Yep. Hmm. Yep. Well, a lot of people do that to get Marius and Cassette together. I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice to get that relationship where it is. Yeah. If you love something, let it go. I mean, that's essentially what she's doing. She's accepting that it's not ever going to be her, and she would rather see him happy with someone else than be angry about it. Yeah, it's very moving and like I said, inspiring because it's hard to feel that way. Frankly, that's not a natural reaction that we have when we are in Eponine's shoes. And yeah, Samantha Barks, man, I'm just so glad that she got cast. You mentioned earlier how she's a theater actress who had played Eponine on stage already. You know, she is the only one, to my knowledge, that is not a movie star other than Colm, but he's a much more minuscule character as far as screen time and stuff. And it's there's a little piece of trivia. Apparently, she meows her notes on set. That's how she warms up, is by meowing in various different keys and pitches. So I thought that was fun. I don't know. What else is really interesting to me is the list of actresses that were considered and auditioned for this role. Let me read this off: Hayden Panettiere, Scarlett Johansson, Leah Michelle, Emily Browning, Lucy Hale, and Evan Rachel Wood. It was also rumored that Taylor Swift had been offered the role. Now, can you imagine any of those people? Because there's some big names in there. Not now, right? Yeah, me either. And it's just it was kind of mind blowing to me when I saw that list of and the difference that these actresses would have brought to that role, both from a physicality standpoint and a musical background standpoint. It's just I don't know. She is my favorite casting in the entire film, and I adore her so much. Yeah, I do as well. And he loses everybody except Cassette. And that's the thing is it can be misunderstood from the outside as this movie is a romance about Cosette and Marius. Like that's one of the big hooks. That's the things. Like I said about earlier, how it's a movie about the French Revolution. Oh, this is a movie about a romance between these two people. But it's so much more layered than that in his character, and he follows it through all the way to the end. And I think what you see is that he becomes worthy of all of the sacrifice that is made in his or for him. He becomes the man he needs to be to carry forth, because he and Cassette are the only ones that live in this story, right? Like everybody else dies. I think if I remember right, I'm trying to think of anybody else that might live, and there's not anybody. So he's the one that has to carry on and live differently, live changed, and live for all of these people that no longer are with us. And so I think he becomes that character over the course of the story. And so, he's somebody we absolutely root for. Oh God. Oh man. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like him as well. This is probably my favorite role of his, honestly. I've I've enjoyed certain performances of his, some much more than others, but this one I think he nails it very much so. Somebody else that really stands out to me, by the way, is the casting of I never can pronounce this guy's name. Thenardier, thank you, and his wife. This they are the humor. They're the levity in the story that is much needed with how heavy it is. And I think that the casting here of Sacha Baron Cohen and Helena Bonham Carter is masterful. They are perfect in this role. They're perfect. They're absolutely perfect. And he brings they bring this needed eccentricity to the roles. They're these vagrants. They're just terrible people. And the thing is, they're like a centerpiece. They're a connecting point for all of the characters because they have this little intimate connection to each and every one in various ways. And they kind of follow the story through all the way to the end with us. And it's almost like we get a unique perspective of everything that's going on from them over the course of time. And I just think that is a really interesting, neat way to do that story wise, to use them as characters. But they also they serve as grounding again because they're characters that I think we can relate to, and that we've all kind of experienced people that are maybe not quite like this, but somewhat like this. People that are out for themselves, people that are worried about their own hide, and they're out to make a buck. And they do so, and they in these performances, they're the ones that you want to hate. They're the villains, if you will, of the story, and I think they're phenomenal. Yeah, absolutely. And I will admit that there are definitely times because of the costuming and the makeup that I just am waiting for Madame Thenardier to like break out a wand and go nutso on everybody. Yeah, I think she does a very good job in the role. I don't for some reason I guess I have like this mental block and I think it's personal because again I think it's partially because people who talk to me about this movie want to make it about Marius and Cosette, and I'm so determined for it not to be that I kind of intentionally lessen her in my world. But I think that she did a very good job, and the couple of standout moments when she does have to, belt a song, she really does a good job. He's actually hanging by the flag at the end. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great explanation of his character. He's also the heartthrob in a lot of ways. I know. Sorry to make you spit out your drink. I know quite a few women especially back in high school when I was seeing this, who resonate with his character more so than Marius. They see Marius as more of kind of a sweet, charming little boy type character, and this he is the studly one who's really the leader and strong, the most strong of them all. So I like him a lot, and I like the acting job by who'd you say, Aaron Tveit a lot. I don't know. This is what everybody talks about because of what her role is. I think that she does a fantastic job. I have a hard time with this because this is one of the sections of the story that I hate the most, and probably because of what's happening. It's so awful to me. And watching her heartache and her death and everything revolving around, and her, of course, singing "I Dreamed a Dream," which is beautiful and terrible all at once. So I think she crushes it, and I really respect the acting job that it took to embody this character and what was happening to her, and do it in a way that was respectful and honest all at the same time. She's amazing, frankly, in my opinion. I think she's wonderful. Yeah. Well, I've hit on most of the songs stuff that the songs they're so intricately a part of the story because they're how we tell the story that it's hard not to talk about them up until this point. And I did mention that I love that this tells the story so perfectly through the list of songs that you can listen to it and know everything that's happening. You don't need interjected dialogue. You're not missing anything. So if anybody is listening to this episode and hasn't actually seen this movie, you can go listen to the soundtrack if you prefer, and you'll get the story. And I think it's pretty amazing. It's also just so good from start to finish. I love that. And I think what you're talking about is important. There are lots of that. There's a lot of that. And it's a common theme in musicals in general. Lots of reprises and such where something that has been touched on or talked about in the beginning comes back later on and is readdressed. But I do want to hear what you have to say about them. I love all of the music, all of the songs. Gosh, I don't know. They just seem to be special. And I don't know why that is, but there are many, many musicals out there where I can point to one, two, or three, maybe four songs that are like, oh, these are the standouts that I think of when I think of this particular story. And in Les Mis, it's hard for me to do that because there are so many that I would try to point to. Oh no. Yes, he is. Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's a very cool observation. And I think people pick up on, or I think people notice it without noticing it. And I'm not phrasing that right, but you know that if you sing it to yourself or when you're hearing it and you're hearing him say, "Who am I?" Like you know that he's that's also the same tune exactly of One Day More, right? But you don't really connect those dots, and I think it's awesome that you're pointing that out. I did notice the sound design though in this one this time around. There are some really good pieces of sound editing and mixing in this, and there's a moment specifically at the end when Javert kills himself. You can hear the sound, and I think this is awesome because so much of the sound is constantly singing that in those brief moments where you don't get it, to have wonderful sound design is fitting. And you hear the rush of the water in the dam, and then when you see him fall, the crunch of his body is like it is. I think it's yeah. Again, it's that visceral response that it generates in you when you hear that, and so I really like the sound design in this as well. Well, the one thing that I want to mention that I haven't already is for me personally, and you mentioned this earlier, that your faith, a Christian faith, is really tied to your reaction to this story, and mine is as well. And that is nowhere more evident than in the ending. I think that this is one of the most perfect endings to a story in general that I've ever seen. When the movie ends, as you mentioned, Valjean has entered into heaven and ushered in. He's taken by those that he loved. Fantine is there. So many of our characters are there. Pretty much everybody, other than Javert, actually. And the thing is that this scene is not depressing, not in the least. It's not sad. It is celebratory and it is glorious. It is full of joy. The bishop is there who showed him mercy, Fantine, who he showed compassion. And the lyrics that take place during this scene: take my hand and lead me to salvation. Take my love, for love is everlasting. And remember the truth that once was spoken: to love another person is to see the face of God, which is one of my favorite quotes of all time. I've never seen something that is more emotionally satisfying as a depiction of heaven and this idea of what it might be like for us to get to heaven and to reunite with all of our loved ones that we have been living without in the remaining years that we have on earth. And so for me, it is extremely powerful and moving, and without being overtly in your face preachy Christian, it's the best depiction of what it's like biblically, I think, for a Christian to go to heaven that we could ever have seen. Yeah. Yep. Well, well, yeah, mostly. I mean, but in the especially in the regards to when it comes to humanity, right? When it comes to being humane, because what we see here is the crimes that are because he was humane, he is being punished. And maybe in that specific type of situation where we really need to, the law needs to be secondary to the morality of erring on the side of taking care of people, loving people, than being lawful, and right. No, just the thing I said earlier, about how I feel like it's such a reflection of how American society is today, what we see at the beginning and the way that the prism system is playing out in France and how we handle ours today. And so, at the risk of like making a very weird tie-in plug, I watched a documentary that came out last year. It was on Netflix. It's actually directed by Ava DuVernay, the awesome director of the movie Selma, and the documentary is called 13th, and it's a fascinating look at the incarceration statistics of African Americans and the history of that in America. And there is a distinct parallel there to some of the ways we see it played out as far as Jalvan. Jalvan. See, I just merged their names. Wow. That's what happens when you talk about this movie too long. With Valjean and Javert and how their system is in place in that country. So interesting to me how that works. But yeah, this movie is just everything about it is so powerful and so incredibly. One thing I will say, I guess my last comment is this: sometimes it's easy for us, Chad, to build up walls and not feel or not emote, or pretend things are not happening in our lives, or go about, we try to silo pieces of things that are not happy or frustrating to us. This movie, whether you want it to or not, if you connect to it and you allow yourself to be a part of the experience, it breaks those down and it brings that emotion out of you. You can't ignore it and you can't fight against it. And I think that that's important. And so sometimes we need to have that cathartic experience. And I think this is one of those films that can really provide that for us. It's a fan, it's a great quote. It is never ever too late to show mercy, forgive, and to choose love. We see that over and over in this film. Not no, not comparatively, it's not. Yeah. Oh, speaking of cats, one quick thing. Tom Hooper, the director of this film, his next project, I don't know. It's been announced for a while, but he is remaking or he is creating a film version of Cats. So there's not a lot known about it, and it's going to be it's a wildly different type of story than Les Mis. So, it's based on a book of kind of poems from T.S. Eliot. So who knows how that's going to turn out? But I'm super excited, and I get to go see Cats next year. It's part of my next season ticket package. So, so I agreed, and Right. Well, you can always find me individually on Twitter at Aaron L. White, AARONELWHITE. You can also find me tweeting from the Feel and Film Twitter account and active in my Feel and Film Facebook discussion group, which Chad is a member of and a big poster. So come there, talk to him as well as a bunch of other movie lovers who generally keep the conversation pretty positive as well. And that's one of the things we love about the discussion group is it's just a lot of people talking about movies and in general being really friendly to each other. And you don't see that a lot online anymore. So if you'd like to check out my show, which Chad and I have both mentioned is kind of similar, kind of spiritually connected in a way to the message that Cinescope has, you can find that all over podcast directories. Feelin Film. That's FEELIN apostrophe FILM. And you can always find everything, written reviews for movies I review each and every week that are coming out new in theaters on feelandfilm.com. Well, thank you. I love coming, and I am so grateful that you would ask me to come back. Awesome.